Cash One Pawn, Missoula's #1 pawn shop.
You want money? We got money. You need money? We got money. We're cash.
Do yourself a favor and make Cash One Pawn part of your online shopping habits. Cash One Pawn has an awesome online inventory, everything from firearms to power tools to speaker equipment to jewelry. Visit Cash One Pawn today.
Cash One Pawn.
8720 Roller Coaster Road, CashOnePawn.com.
Our lead-up coverage to what amounts to the FCS Game of the Week continues here on both the Big Sky Breakdown podcast series and on Nuanez Now, ESPN Radio. The next young man who joins us, Tanner Castora. He is a freelance journalist who's covered South Dakota State in several capacities over the years. Tanner, first of all, just start there. First of all, thanks for being here. Appreciate you jumping on. Start there, though. Tell people just sort of about your journey covering the South Dakota State program.
Grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, went to Kent State University. When I graduated, I applied around the entire country for a job in sports broadcasting. And in 2021, I got hired by the CBS news station in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They assigned me to cover South Dakota State. And so during my 2-year contract with the news station, that's what I did. Obviously covered a lot more things, but South Dakota State was one of my main focuses. And I got pretty close with some people in the program, including their head coach at the time, John Stiglemeier. And we talked one day in his office, and I said, "Hey, look, coach, when you retire, could I write a book on your career?" He said, "Sure." And so my 2-year contract with Kello ended at almost the exact same time that coach retired. And so I decided from that point on, I was going to become a freelance journalist and continue to cover the team in my own way, right? I have a radio show in town. I do write stories on my Medium page that gets a lot of good traction, and I'm also writing this book. So I actually just finished a book. It's John Stieglemeier's biography / the story of the South Dakota State football program, how they became a Division I national champion when they started as a mediocre Division II team. So mix all that in, it makes for a pretty good story. So gotten to know the team pretty well, and still am covering them still to this day.
Well, definitely why I wanted to connect with you, because we certainly have similar stories. I've done the independent thing now for about 12 years and, parlaying it into radio a little bit. And I got to off air. I'll get your advice on how to get a book done, because I have 2 book ideas. I just don't know how to go about starting it and finishing it. But what a great book subject. John Stiglemeier, man. I mean, you know this, having been a guy that's been around him so much. But I mean, Coach Stig is as kind of a man that I think I've ever met. I mean, I remember I interviewed him once upon a time, when the Cats and South Dakota State played back in, must have been 2014. Didn't interview him again for a couple of years. He totally remembered me. He remembered stuff about me. I'm like, man, how do you even do that? I'm just like a reporter from a different town or whatever. And I was always struck by how awesome of a guy he was. That must have been so fun for you to spend time with him and sort of tell his story.
Not only fun, but really good for, honestly, the development of my character. That guy is, not only is he so kind, but I have found him to be a picture of humility. He's a guy who he walks around town and he can't go anywhere without someone wanting to shake his hand, take a picture with him. I mean, especially after winning that national championship, you talk about a storybook ending. The guy is the head coach for 26 years, and in his final season wins the school's first national championship and then retires, sails off into the sunset. And his popularity almost went through the roof here in South Dakota, but remains the same man. And what you just said is a great example. He remembers names. He tries to make almost every conversation about the person across from him. When people just want to ask him about himself, he tries to almost always turn it around and make it about the person that he's speaking to. So, meeting with him almost every single week for 2 years, the things that we've spoken about to understand how he handled certain situations, treated people in situations that honestly almost goes against what you usually hear. Like there's players that should have been kicked off the team that he would give grace to time and time again. I mean, I could go on and on about the things that I've learned from him, but yeah, not only has it been extremely enjoyable to meet so many people through him, right? Because he's coached so many people have coached with him. I got to interview over 70 former players and coaches. That was awesome too. But the most important thing has just been learning life lessons from a man who has deep wisdom.
Tanner Castora joining us here on the Big Sky Breakdown podcast series. He covers South Dakota State, and the Jackrabbits are in Bozeman. on Saturday for a gold rush under the lights, and probably, I mean, not probably, I think certainly the FCS
Mhm.
game of the week. When Coach Stieglemeier retired, you're right. It was sort of like this storybook. The only other parallel I can really think of at the Division One AA or FCS level was when Don Reed did that same thing at Montana. He won the '95 national championship and rode off into the sunset. And then the Grizz got back to the national championship the following year, but they lost because they ran into Marshall Thundering Herd team. They had Randy Moss, and that's about as much of an unfair advantage I've ever seen in the Division One AA level. But regardless, South Dakota State, their transition, Stig hands it off to Jimmy Rogers, and they didn't miss a beat. And I actually thought that 23 South Dakota State team is among the great teams I've ever seen. So how were they able to make that transition so fluidly? We'll get into this next transition here in a minute, but how were they able to make that one so fluidly, do you think?
Well, when you're replacing a legend, I think, like, let's just, for example, look at Alabama right now, and we'll see how things play out. But Nick Saban retires. And I'm not saying that John Stiglemeier is Nick Saban, but comparative wise, there's parallels you can make to this level, right? So in the state of South Dakota, Stig's a huge deal and he's beloved. I think replacing an icon, a legend, is a tough thing to do, but it makes it easier when the person who's taking his position is one of his former players, is someone who's been a part of the program. Now, if you bring in someone like in Alabama's case, a Kalen DeBoer from the outside, he's not going to get the leniency, the grace that an Alabama Crimson Tide through and through guy would. So with South Dakota State, they brought in Jimmy Rogers, who played for Coach Stig, who coached under him for a decade. And that right there puts people at ease. Now you add in that season, almost the entire team came back. It was a perfect situation for a first year head coach. And Jimmy talked about it that year that, look, the leadership on this team, they do it themselves. I mean, a Mason McCormick, Garrett Greenfield, Mark Gronowski, Isaiah Davis, guys who have played in the NFL or going to play in the NFL and who had been raised in the program. It's not like they had transfers come in. These were South Dakota State guys who were there from the time they were freshmen to their, in some cases, sixth season. So Jimmy was handed the keys to, a Ferrari, and he was just told, hey, just stay on the narrow path, just keep this thing moving, and you'll be just fine. And that's what he did, and he deserves credit too, because there's a situation with a new coach where it's like, hey, if Jimmy fails, then or if they don't win a national championship, he's a failure. But if they win the national championship, well, that's Stig's team. And to be honest, he kind of dealt with some of that. I even thought of myself, like, look, he got this incredible team. Of course, he's going to win. Well, he does deserve some credit because he's the guy who did it. So it was kind of a seamless transition at the time, because look, like, not only is he given a great team, but he understood exactly what was expected at South Dakota State because he too was raised in the program.
The There's always a party in Montana, whether you're going to a wedding, a football game, a concert. Montana Party Bus can get you there safe and will take you anywhere in Montana. You can relax with friends in style, luxury, and safety. Western Montana based for local and regional travel within Montana borders. Montana Party Bus is great for both large and small groups with a capacity of up to 30 guests. If you want to elevate your event, call them anytime, 406-200-8096. You can also visit mtpartybus.com. Travel anywhere in Montana in style with the Montana Party Bus.
Is a will you marry me in your future? Or maybe you do it all over again. Hi, I'm Brian Toon with Jewelry Design Center, inviting you to come see the largest selection of Will You Marry Me in the state of Montana. The brightest diamonds of every shape and size, unique settings built to last, and skilled jewelers on site offering free sizing and maintenance for life, because that's how long we want to be your jeweler. Jewelry Design Center in Missoula, on Brooks, across from the Montana Club.
You mentioned all those names of the players. Who's the most high-profile transfer South Dakota State's got in the last couple of years? Because all the guys that I could name that have been great players there, from all these crossovers that we've covered, none of them are transfers. I guess Chris Oladokun a couple of years ago was a transfer. That's about the only guy I could even think of, though.
That's the first name that came to my mind was Chris Oladokun. The other guy, a current guy, I would tell you, Sam Hagan, came
Okay,
from
yeah,
North Dakota.
yep.
He's now starting at tackle for the Jacks. And I'm hearing, I actually was talking to an NFL scout the other day that he's a legit guy on NFL scouts' radar. So I'd say he's becoming that. But before so, it would definitely be Chris Oladokun, who took over for the gap year between Mark
Yeah.
Gronowski's injury.
Yeah, for those that are listening that remember the 2021 semifinal game between Montana State and South Dakota State, that was the quarterback during that game because Gronowski had gotten hurt the previous spring. Yeah, interesting because both those guys, I mean, Oladokun came from Sanford and the man you mentioned before, he came from North Dakota. So those guys are
Yeah.
FCS transfers. So there's not a ton of because this is like the endless question for the Montana schools, right? Brett Vegan at Montana State, he comes from the North Dakota State tree, and they
Mhm.
pretty much are prioritizing similar program building as NDSU and SDSU have prioritized. High school kids, get them in, develop them, teach them the ways. The Cats have brought in a fair amount of impact transfers too, though, like Rohan Jones, who was one of the great players on the Cats last year.
Mhm.
Even he was an FCS guy though that transferred in. So there has been a ton of FBS guys. Then you look at Montana though, and they are going all in on. I mean, they brought in 28 transfers, almost all of them from the FBS, half of them from the Power Five. So it's just an interesting sort of parallel in the FCS. There's a bunch of different ways to do it.
There are, and I feel like right now coaches and programs are feeling out what works for them because this is new. Like this is a new world that everyone has been forced to walk into, and I think they're figuring out how it works for them. With the new rule with the 105 roster limit, South Dakota State did bring in a couple Nebraska transfers who were kind of, guys on for the Cornhuskers that weren't going to play a lot that are now getting a chance to shine. Alex Bullock, you're going to see him. He's a wide receiver, number 84. He's one of those guys for South Dakota State that they're very high on, very high on. So we'll see how that plays out. But you're right. Right now, for teams like South Dakota State, Montana State, that hasn't been the formula. Will that remain the case moving forward? We'll see.
When it comes to now this recent coaching transition, it's funny. Dan Jackson and Jimmy Roberts are different in personality, but I think they're the same in their priorities on like defense and things like that. And
Mhm.
you know, from my just broad knowledge, not even that specific, but just broad knowledge of what they do defensively, it seems like it's a pretty similar system as what they ran under Stieglemeier and Coach Rogers and now Dan Jackson. But before we get to the scheme part of it, though, Dan Jackson himself, I loved your story that you wrote about him. You can go check out Tanner's story on Dan Jackson and just sort of his rise because I think a lot of times we overplay the guys that they went to this big school and then they coached at this big school. Like Dan Jackson, this is a guy that cut his teeth and
Yeah.
went to the high school ranks, and it's like a true American success story. It's an awesome story. So, what do you think made him the right fit to take over there at South Dakota State?
Well, back in 2019, John Stiglemeier, who was the head coach at the time, met with Justin Sell, who was the AD. And Sell's getting to feel like, hey, Stig, how much longer do you think you're going to coach? Stig goes, maybe 3 to 5 years. We'll see. He didn't give him an exact number, but knew he was approaching, that time. And Stig gives him four names that he wants Sell to really consider that he feels could be the head coach of South Dakota State one day. Two of those four were Jimmy Rogers and Dan Jackson. Now, in 2022, when Stig decides it's time to step down, the only guy left on the staff was Jimmy Rogers. Dan Jackson had gone elsewhere. He went to Northern Illinois, then Vanderbilt, Idaho, and then recently had taken a job as a DC at New Mexico under Jason Eck. And so Dan actually was a guy who was on Justin Sell's radar for quite some time. And again, Dan Jackson is a guy who played at South Dakota State. He coached under Stig for several years. And I'm sure it's like this at every place that's successful, but it's just when you understand the lineage and the culture and how the program became what they are, that matters. That really matters. And there's a thing here at South Dakota State. It's the JFPA, Jackrabbit Former Players Association. It is hundreds of players, former players, who get together. They not only tailgate, but they raise thousands of dollars for the program to use, which is a huge advantage. I mean, for example, there was a player who tragically passed away a couple years ago. They raised over $70,000 for his wife and his children. It's
Wow.
amazing what these guys do. If you bring in a former player as the head coach, you keep that relationship strong. There's a lot of moving pieces that come with a coaching hire. And Dan Jackson is a guy who people love. And I've gotten to know him over the past few months. And it's like you feel like you're his friend pretty quickly. And that's a cool thing. Like and it's not a fake thing. It's just how he is. And I think that starts with his upbringing. He was a teacher. He was a high school coach. This wasn't like he started out, as you said, at some, big time program. And like he's built himself slowly, steadily to this point, just like the program has. A D2 team, Division I national championship took them, 20 years. Dan Jackson has slowly built himself into this moment, and he's so familiar with this place, and he's loved here that it just seemed like a perfect fit.
Join Town Pump's Pump It Up Rewards Plus program and never pay full price for fuel again.
Save 5 cents on every gallon every day at any Town Pump across Montana.
Plus, earn and redeem points on your favorite in-store items to get free stuff with our clubs.
Stop in and pick up a rewards card. Download the Pump It Up Rewards Plus app today.
Or visit townpump.com/rewards to register and start saving.
Right down the road. Pump it up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was slam dunk when they hired him for sure. And I've only talked to 2 South Dakota State players this week so far, but they both said the same thing. Hey, this guy has open door policy. He's as welcoming of a coach as we ever had, and I think he's going to do a really good job there for sure. Okay, so tell us as much as you can at least about the Jimmy Rogers departure from South Dakota State, because there was a lot of moving parts. It was sort of crazy in the FCS world because you had these various names like Brent Vigen, Jimmy Rogers, even Bobby Houck to a certain extent. Certainly Matt Nance, who's a former, FCS guy too. They were all in the mix for these jobs. And Jason Eck, who's going to New Mexico, who's going to Fresno State, who's going to Washington State. It was like this musical chairs, but Rogers ends up at Washington State. So what can you tell us about the departure?
Well, it was unexpected. I don't think people saw it coming. This is a guy who, again, took over for John Stiglemeier. Did people think he would be here for 26 years like Stig? No. But I do think people had an expectation that he'd be the head coach longer than 2 seasons. So when he left, it was quite the surprise. And then, it caused a lot of uncertainty. It was like, first of all, what's the team going to look like next year? Because he goes to Washington State and he's bringing players with him. He's bringing current players. He brought a lot of their recruiting class. And it was like, are they going to have anyone left?
Right.
Like, we didn't know. And the players within the program, I had a story about this months ago, specifically Chase Mason and Quentin Christensen. Chase is the starting quarterback this year, and Quentin is one of their best players. He plays right tackle for the Jacks. He and Chase start basically, rallying their teammates. Once they decided they were going to stay, they start rallying their teammates. Now, all this time, while they're talking to their teammates these couple days, they don't even know who their head coach is going to be. They have no idea. And this is during the holidays. This is the end of December, in between New Year's Eve and Christmas. So everyone's at home, no one's on campus. It was pretty chaotic, to be honest with you.
Totally.
And talking to former players, people were worried. People were worried. Like, not only are these players leaving, there was no coaching staff. Literally no one left. So what's going to happen here? There was a lot of worry, to be quite honest with you, and that forced Justin Sell in the athletic department to work quickly, to work very quickly. There's a quote in my story about Sell saying, every day we don't get a coach hired, we might lose 6 to 7 more players. Like, that's the world that we're living in now. That's just the reality. Like, you had to work quickly 10 years ago. Now it's at a hyper speed. And so they got Dan Jackson in here as quickly as they could. And then Dan starts working the phones, calling these players that he doesn't even know, telling them, hey, look, trust me, believe me, stay here at South Dakota State. We're going to be okay. And he gets, it was a snowball effect. This guy's going to stay. Okay, you're committed. Drayton Gannon, you're a tight end, you're a good player, you're committed. Call 3 of your buddies. Tell them you talk to me. Tell them that, you just give them a vision of what this is going to be. It was hectic. Everyone involved has told me like we've never had a few weeks like that. So was it crazy? It was, but I think they've done a heck of a job, weathering the storm, and it helps a lot. When I think you can call them pillars, Christensen, one of your best offensive linemen, you know who your quarterback's going to be. Joe Ullman, a linebacker, starting middle linebacker, he says he's coming back. When you have pillars like that of players, that helps as well. So they've done a really good job of, dealing with a pretty unique situation. Not every day do you see a coach leave, take a whole staff, and take a lot of players with him.
Seems like it could be a rallying cry for the guys that stayed too, right? I mean, this is the Montana State didn't lose their coach, their head coach, but this was the story. I mean, Adam Jones told me this exact same deal. He said, "Hey, the portal opens up in December. We were still playing all December into January." He said half the guys on our team were getting called all the time, and the guys that were going to go to the portal, they knew, and we knew they were going to the portal too. And he said it just messed up everything when we went to the national championship. And then all of a sudden, the offensive coordinator leaves, the offensive line coach leaves, the defensive coordinator leaves because nobody knew what anybody was doing. But these guys have all talked about at Montana State. Hey, we know we lost all these seniors. We know we lost all these transfers. What about us? Like, we're the guys that stayed. That's what Chase Mason just told me too. Like, hey, we lost all these guys. What about the guys we got? Like, what about the guys that are here? It seems like that's a pretty parallel narrative for these two programs.
I think you're right. Like sometimes I think we over exaggerate like adversity a team has gone through, but I think that really was a unifying experience. And not only that, decision to stay and to, come together, then they have the death of a teammate. Nate White, who is probably going to be the starting running back, transfers in from Wisconsin. If he wasn't going to be the starter, he was going to be the 1-2 punch. And he passes away. And so, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that what South Dakota State has gone through from the coaching departure and all that turmoil and then having the death of a teammate has brought them a lot closer. And it has been a rallying point for this program. And you saw it week 1. They looked like an angry team who was so happy to finally be on the field. And we'll see how long that carries over. But I'll tell you this, they're not going to face any deeper adversity than what they've already gone through this season.
Big Sky Breakdown, proudly presented by the Bobcat Collective at Montana State. The Bobcat Collective is the NIL collective that serves Montana State University student athletes. The collective is partnered with Montana State to connect fans, alumni, businesses, and local nonprofits with Montana State student athletes. Opportunities through the collective allow student athletes to earn compensation while serving the greater Montana State University community. Sign up now for memberships and enjoy automatic entry into raffles for free tickets while supporting the bright minds at Montana State. They have multiple different membership tiers, and you can also be a one-time supporter, and you can also business partner or corporate supporter. Visit bobcatcollective.com for more. So then coming into this weekend, I'm so excited for this game on one hand. On the other hand, it's almost like by default that these two teams remain, even despite all of the turmoil they went through, two of the top teams in the country. And, you can go down that rabbit hole all day long about the demise of the FCS and all this stuff. But as I always remind most of our audience, like the fact is we're watching and covering the best of the best. So like, even if the rest of it's falling apart, you still got Montana State, South Dakota State, North Dakota, South Dakota are still pretty dang good too. So let's just soak it up. But what do you think of just about this specific matchup and sort of the ramifications that could come out of it here on Saturday?
Well, I think it's a measuring stick game. That's for sure. And I'll say this, and this doesn't make it great for guys like us who cover these teams, but like coming into the season, we really don't know what we have. When there's so many new pieces, and Montana State doesn't have quite as many as South Dakota State, it makes it impossible to say, I'm expecting this, I'm expecting that, because in reality, like for South Dakota State, this was a pretty much totally new team. And then last week they played Sacramento State, who was a totally new team. How good is Sacramento State? I'm not sure. I think their defensive line was legit, but besides that, I don't know. So look, did South Dakota State look good? Yeah, I actually was pleasantly surprised with how, efficient they were. Did they have some turnovers, things to clean up? No question. But they played well. Montana State, watched film on them. How much are we taking away from a game against Oregon? Oregon they might win the national championship in the FBS. So how much can we take away from that? I'm not sure. This is a measuring stick game, in my opinion. This game will answer this question. Can South Dakota State win a national championship? Right now, I would tell you yes, probably because of what you just mentioned, Colter, that the FCS isn't that strong. There's a top heavy element to it. Is South Dakota State one of the better teams? Well, we're about to find out. They're going into as hostile as an environment as you can find in the FCS. I'm sure it will be rocking up there. It's the Gold Rush game. And it's already a great stadium. I mean, I remember watching that game in 2021, the semifinal. Incredible crowd, incredible atmosphere. A big test for South Dakota State. This is a Chase Mason, a guy who's been in the program for 4 years, first time as the starter, first time on the road as a starter, and that's the same for a lot of these kids. So Montana State, I'd probably tell you, is in the same boat. How good are they? Well, we'll find out on Saturday because both of these teams right now, the rankings say they're at the top of the FCS, but the truth is we don't actually know how good they are.
Do you have any early thoughts on how this thing might go, or like what the keys will be on either side?
I honestly feel confident that South Dakota State can come in and win this game. I would tell you the key is probably Chase Mason. He's a kid who is an incredible athlete, and you will see that to be true. Will he play within himself? That was the question that we all wondered because if you went to practice the whole month of fall camp, he would make throws that were unbelievable. And then 2 plays later, you'd be like, what was that? Now, in the game, we didn't see that. He was composed. He didn't try and do too much. 17 of 23, 190, had a touchdown, made some plays with his legs, never forced the ball, never tried to do too much in the pocket as far as getting out of trouble. Probably took too many. He did take too many sacks. They had 7 sacks, South Dakota State had. So, will he continue to show that? Will he be a guy who plays within himself? Isn't making mistakes, isn't trying to be Superman, and just does his part. If he does that, South Dakota State will certainly be in the game. Now, if he gets ahead of himself and maybe a little too amped up and uncomfortable in a road environment that he's never played in as the starter, maybe that changes things. So his poise, his demeanor in the first quarter will tell me a lot moving forward as to how this game will play out.
Tell people how they can find your stuff and follow along with what you got going on.
You can follow on my Twitter. It's Tanner Castora, just an underscore in between the middle of my name. I occasionally post stories on my Medium page, and I also keep up on Spotify. I have a radio show that I link every week on Twitter, and my book on Coach Stig and the program is coming out in about 4 weeks. So a lot going on right now during football season, and you can find it all on my Twitter page. I'll keep it posted, and people can can follow there.
Thanks so much for the insight, man. It was great catching up and great work on all things. Certainly, I'm going to put it in order for the John Stiglemeier book myself, but thanks so much for chiming in here today.
Thank you, Colter. I appreciate you having me come on.